All right, folks. So we'll start the webinar now. Welcome to the Climate Reality Project webinar. My name is Lauren Clark and I'm the Energy Projects Coordinator here at EOS Eco Energy. And this webinar is part of our annual Climate Change Week, and this is our 9th annual celebration of climate change solutions. And I'm really pleased to introduce Tracey to you, and I will take it away, Tracey.
Great, thank you, Lauren. I'm just going to start now. If there's a few people that trickle in later, that's fine. So if for those of you who don't know me, my name is Tracey Wade. I'm a planner, professional land use planner by trade, but also have been involved in the climate issues, I guess you could say, in the Tantramar region since about 2008. So we've done a lot of work. We've done a lot of engagement pieces with the Chignecto Climate Change Collaborative as well. And then last year I was, during a period of isolation, I was able to take advantage of some training that was given through the Climate Reality Project. So that is it was initiated by Al Gore, former Vice President Al Gore, to look at the climate crisis. So myself and several hundred, if not 1,000 other people joined in on that training. So that's what this is about. So I just want to caveat this saying this is a kind of a global look at the climate crisis and its solutions. There is quite a bit of a heavy emphasis on the United States. I have slipped in a few slides around Canada's response, and to a lesser degree New Brunswick's response as well. So I'm just going to try and slide through it. It's quite a long presentation in terms of the number of slides. I'm going to slip through them pretty quickly. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat for Lauren, and then if we have time, we'll try and get to them afterwards. But anyway, I will begin. So this picture is called the Blue Marble. It's the most published photograph of Earth. It was taken from the Apollo 17 in 1972. It captures the complete circumference of the Earth and helps us see the big picture of what the planet looks like. So there are 3 questions through the Climate Reality Project that we look at. Must we change? Is there a need to? Why are we bothering with this? Can we change, and will we change? So focusing on the must we change, it requires a little explanation of what the climate crisis is all about. So this is the horizon of the Earth, and it illustrates how thin the sky is. It's not this vast expanse we see when we look up from the ground to the sky. If you could drive a car straight up in the air at superhighway speed, you'd probably get to the top of the sky or the atmosphere within 5 minutes. So we're using this, quite frankly, as an open sewer at the moment. It's a problem because when sunlight comes through that layer, so the atmospheric layer, and warms up the Earth, and then some of the heat that's absorbed is radiated back out into space in the form of infrared radiation. And some of it is trapped by natural greenhouse gas layer, which is a good thing. It's what keeps temperatures within a healthy boundary here on Earth. But the problem is we're thickening the greenhouse gas layer with the CO2 concentrations, and that means that we're basically spewing 150 million tons of human-made heat-trapping gas into the atmosphere every single day. And when the greenhouse gas layer thickens, that's what traps more of the outgoing infrared rays, and that's where we get the warming of the planet. And where does all the greenhouse pollution come from? Well, it comes from a lot of different sources. Transportation is a big problem. Thawing of the permafrost is now a source as well in the north. Burning of forests, mining, methane from landfills, and other sources as well. But the biggest source by far is our dependence on fossil fuels, which results in all this extra carbon dioxide being spewed into the sky. You can see that after World War II, it really started shooting up, and it's still increasing today. And as a result, that extra heat that's being trapped by the global warming pollution drives temperatures up. So 2020 now officially has tied with the 2016 as the hottest year ever since data started being measured. In fact, 19 of the 20 hottest years have been since 2001, and the 5 hottest years of all time have been in the last 5 years. This should have 2020 on it. Sorry, this was slides are from last year, but anyway, we should put 2020 on this instead of 2015. So just as some examples, it's not just statistics saying this, we'll look at some evidence of that. So last summer, Phoenix and Miami had their hottest months ever in July. In fact, temperature records were broken all over the world in 2020, including in Australia. Look at the capital of Australia. Canberra set its all-time high temperature record. It's 111 degrees Fahrenheit, so 44 degrees Celsius on January 4th, which is, of course, their summer. In Africa, Ghana set its all-time high temperature record as well. Very similar temperature. And in 2019, Europe had the hottest year on record, and all of these countries that are listed there, France, Germany, Netherlands, had their individual hottest year records. Toward the end of June of last year, north of the Arctic Circle in Siberia, the temperature went over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, so that's 38 degrees Celsius. It's probably the hottest temperature north of the Arctic Circle that's ever been recorded. But if we step back and take a look at the Earth as a whole and see that 71% of the planet is covered by the ocean, then 93% of all that extra heat that's being trapped is going into the water, into the ocean itself. And the ocean temperatures are setting new high temperature records as well. 2000, again, set an all-time new record. Or sorry, not 2000, 2020 set an all-time new record. And when the oceans heat up so much, that means that the storms that come over the oceans are getting much stronger because the warmer water feeds the convection energy and feeds moisture into them as well. So last year there were 30 named storms, 5 landfalls in Louisiana alone, and 12 in the US. And then there was tandem storms that were happening as well at the same time. So some examples, so Tropical Storm Laura did significant damage in the Northern Caribbean. As an example. And the other thing that happens when the oceans heat up so much is that it disrupts the water cycle by vastly increasing the amount of water vapor that comes off the oceans. So there's a lot of evaporation happening with the heat. And that's the first stage of the water cycle. And then it's carried by the atmospheric rivers as water vapor over land, and then it's released as downpours, and then it works its way back to the seas. So with more water vapor, there's heavier precipitation events, and then more water returning to the sea in rushes. And what we're seeing is much more water in these storms. In the Philippines last spring, more than 500,000 people were displaced by this storm in May. More than 1 million people have already been driven out of the region north of Dhaka, which is the capital of Bangladesh, and then farther north across the border into India as well. So again, these are last year's pictures. You know, if you look at these big downpours on a global basis, they have significantly increased. They're 4 times more likely more likely now than they were just a few decades ago. And we're getting what the scientists are calling rain bombs now. So can you imagine being caught in the middle of the storm? There's one here in Tennessee, again, that happened last year. They're becoming very common across the United States and Canada as far as that goes, and around the world, unfortunately. And of course, the gravest effects of all the attacks on the environment are being suffered by the poorest. So Pope Francis and others agree that many of these events are having the biggest impact on poor people and communities of color specifically. And then when you add COVID to that, when people have to be evacuated during a pandemic, that complicates it a great deal. And that's what happened in India over the summer last year during several events. So communities of color, minority communities, and poor people are hit the hardest in the United States as well. So very specifically. So just as an example of some of that, if you look at the 10 counties that are most vulnerable to flooding and other disasters in the United States, 81% are home to the minority populations. Like they have 81% minority populations in these counties. And then globally, devastating floods are happening to farmers and in other regions and to people all over the world. Again, they're happening more than 4 times often than in 1980. In India, they get a monsoon every year, but the monsoons are much stronger now. So 2020, the monsoons were 50% stronger than normal, and that meant a lot of people were impacted. A lot more people were impacted. In China, 700,000 people had to be evacuated because of this climate emergency. So this is last June. And 100,000 people in Kenya at the end of last April. And in the U.S., farmers have been, in Canada for that degree, for that fact, the farmers have been going through a number of years with massive flooding happening in the spring planting season, which has damaged a lot of cropland. So this is $20 billion in damages. So there's a lot of issues with food security as well. With extreme weather events projected as well, New Brunswick is not immune to any of this. So everyone will remember from 2018 and 19, we had 2 back-to-back years of those floods that were supposed to be one in every 100 years. So the fact that we had 2 of them back-to-back leads me to believe, and there's been more recently. So 2008 was another one as well. These storms are going to be happening more and more frequently. And it's not just rain. So this is a crazy storm. This is from 2017. There was 5 feet of hail in 15 minutes. I can't get my head wrapped around that. The people in these cars had to be rescued by chainsaws because they were encapsulated in ice, basically. There's another one of these too that just happened in Guadalajara, Mexico in 2019. So 5 feet of hail fell overnight in Guadalajara. So there is crazy precipitation happening all over the world. So of course, that same heat that's disrupting the water cycle by putting all that moisture in the air and causing downpours is also pulling moisture out of the soil and making droughts deeper and longer. And again, we're not immune to this. The Atlantic provinces, New Brunswick in particular, experienced a significant drought last summer. So just as more examples, in June 2020, groundwater levels fell very low in Europe last summer. And the droughts in parts of the Czech Republic were the worst they'd seen in 500 years. Excuse me. And in India as well, they almost ran out of water completely in 2019. So, and that's been seen in other cities as well. And of course, the higher temperatures are associated with more fires. And of course, we saw that last summer in California. So there was nearly 10,000 fires that burned almost 4.2 million acres. And that's 4% of the California's landmass, which is massive. So this is just a picture from Napa, California. And of course, who can forget the fires from Australia basically a year ago during the height of their summer? There was massive wildlife and natural catastrophe there. And of course, in the Amazon, these are what this slide shows are human-made fires that are meant to clear land for agriculture. And the ironic thing is that the agriculture never lasts very long there because the topsoil is so thin. So the other thing that we need to be aware of is that, insurance companies are certainly paying attention to all of this because they have to pay out when these disasters strike. And you can see the pattern that they've been following. So from 1980, that we're looking at 200 events, just over 200 events a year. We're now well over 600 events, and that's just 30 years, 40 years, I guess, in time period. So then the increasing temperatures are also melting the glacial ice. Here's an unnamed glacier in Greenland 85 years ago. And here's what it looks like now. So it's basically a lake. So if we superimpose NASA's measurement of how much the ice has melted and fallen into the sea in Greenland, it's melting much faster than any of the scientists predicted. So in fact, it's melting 4 times faster than originally thought, and it's melting more from the permanent ice sheet than from the glaciers, which are over the water. The same thing is happening in Antarctica. You can see how the melting of the ice in Antarctica has accelerated dramatically in the last few years. And again, this again has surprised some of the experts. So with all those melting glaciers, that's adding water to the oceans, which is causing sea level rise. The 10 cities measured by population that are most affected are largely in Southeast Asia, South Asia, and China. But there's also Miami, Florida is on this list as well. But when you look at the cities with assets at risk, the #1 hardest hit is Miami. And then there's China, and then there is New York and Newark. Tokyo is in there too as well. So these are rich, not just the poorer countries that are being affected, but also some of the wealthiest cities are being impacted. And then there's things like this. So this is an octopus in a parking garage in Miami because of the sea level rise and what they call sunny day flooding now. So even when it's just a high tide now, there are areas that flood when they used to be dry. So speaking of New York City, there's almost $130 billion in real estate assets at risk in the flood zones there. But probably the most vulnerable are the people who live in low-lying islands like Kiribati here, where the country has already purchased land in another country so their population can be relocated as the seas take over. And here in New Brunswick and in Sackville, we're not immune to the challenges. I think most of you would know that we live at the head of the Bay of Fundy and there's a small piece of land that connects Nova Scotia to mainland Canada, known as the Chignecto Isthmus. And the isthmus is protected by dikes that prevent the land from being flooded twice daily by the world's largest tides. So here's just a picture, and this picture is from the it says early 2020s, it should say early 2000s. This is just a spring tide, no wave effects or wind effects, but look how close the high water mark is to the rail line, and that makes up part of the dike. It's also a national security issue, and the U.S. Department of Defense has for many years warned about food and water shortages, pandemic diseases, and refugee flows caused by the climate crisis. So there may not be a direct link. There never is a direct link from climate change to anything, but there is certainly linkages to the pandemic that we're facing and what's been going on around the world. So for example, how does climate change affect the food supply? All sorts of ways. So heat, pests, fires, water availability, some of the toxins that are being introduced. There's disease and drought, as well as floods. And in fact, it's affecting the nutritional value of the plants as well. Again, we're in the middle of this pandemic, and it's worth remembering that COVID-19 has already pushed a lot of people into hunger status. And then some of the scientists are deeply concerned about this because, we're still having these climate crisis with drought. So we've got there's a lot of things that are being affected. In Belgium, for instance, saw its driest day since the 1800s, and North Americans are seeing disruptions in the food supply chain as a result. We're already seeing warmer temperatures reducing yields of maize and wheat and barley in the tropics and the subtropics. And also last year, there were massive locust swarms in India, which is caused by a number of factors, but some of that is climate related as well. Again, it has to do with the higher CO2 levels as well as heat waves. And then this happened after the historic drought in Syria that lasted for over 5 years. Of course, there's other factors as well, but that led to a lot of migration of refugees from Syria to neighboring countries and then across the Mediterranean to Europe. It destabilized populations and the political equilibrium in many places. So it's not just about the environment, it really does impact people. So climate change is also a medical emergency too. In fact, one of the projects that I'm working on right now is looking at the health impacts of climate change in New Brunswick. So there's a lot of stuff that's happening on that front too. So how does climate change affect health? So there's the water quality, it's food availability, air pollution, heat stress has massive implications. Not so much in the Maritimes, but certainly in the warmer, more temperate parts of the world. There's increased allergens, there's stress on mental health, especially related to extreme weather events. And then there's more infectious diseases as well. So of course, there's tropical diseases are also part of this conversation, and they're on the move and moving north. Airline travel has a lot to do with this, but the climate conditions are changing and changing where the diseases can take root and become endemic as well. So this does not have coronavirus on it, otherwise the whole thing would be red. But you know, there are other things that were very traditionally considered to be tropical diseases, which potentially now are moving into, you know, the northern colder climates. And of course, some of these diseases are coming because we're encroaching on previously wild areas where there are millions of viruses that are located there. They're just naturally there. Just humans haven't encountered them before. It's suggested that there are 5 new infectious diseases emerging on average each year. And of course, 75% of these are diseases that come from animals to humans, like COVID. It originated in bats and it was encountered and then it spread widely. So the other piece of this, of course, the relationship between COVID and climate change really can't be understated. What climate change it basically exacerbates existing conditions and makes them worse, similar to what COVID does. So people that are already vulnerable are even more vulnerable. And it turns out a lot of that has to do with race and ethnicity as well, and where people live. So compared to white people, so the indigenous people are almost twice as often to come down with COVID. Um, the Asian population is very similar to the white number, or the white population numbers, but African American hospitalization is almost 4 times as high, and death is 3 times as high, and the same with Latino and Hispanic. So that's information from the CDC from November. So it's definitely, there is a significant impact there, and it's so we're not all being impacted equally. Air pollution is part of the problem. So if people have asthma and other lung issues as a result of climate change, then they are more susceptible to COVID. We know when we burn fossil fuels, we create CO2, and at the same time, we see the creation of so-called conventional air pollution that makes people very sick. So there was a study of 324 cities in China last spring that found that 15 to 22% increase in COVID cases in areas where there were already elevated levels of particulate pollution. So air pollution is a threat to everyone, but again, some people are disproportionately impacted. So in the US, the biggest polluters, including hazardous waste treatment, storage, and disposal plants, are overwhelmingly located in poor non-white areas. In some cases, in some areas that are flooded, there's hazardous chemical substances and hazardous chemical waste that are released into the local area, which impact water and soil quality. If you look back at Hurricane Harvey from 2017, there were 100 toxic chemicals released during the downpour and the flooding that accompanied that. It had devastating impact for the communities that were located in the area, and most were low income and minority communities. The other piece, and I don't have very much on this at all, is that we're also at risk of losing up to 50% of all land-based species. So biodiversity is a massive casualty in terms of what's happening with climate change. A lot of time it comes when you're talking to decision makers, though, they want to know about the the money and how much it's going to cost and what the actual outlay of money is to address some of this. So we often focus, especially for me, from a land use perspective, look at types of infrastructure at risk from extreme weather. So you're talking about dams, roads, train tracks, power lines, drinking water systems, communication lines, all those kinds of things. There's a dollar value associated with each of those. So preventative measures and raising roads and improving systems in the long run will end up saving money. Here's just an example of a road that got washed out last summer because of an extreme weather event. Sorry, this next slide always takes a few minutes to get going. So what is the cost of carbon? All sorts of things. Between the political instability, the floods, the wildfires, the drought, ecosystem loss, water scarcity, and all those other things, there is a huge cost to just letting things go or keeping things the same way. We haven't even talked about ocean acidification, which is a whole other piece of the puzzle. But climate change is definitely the largest threat to the global economy. So must we change? I guess a very long explanation of yes, we must change indeed. So can we change? Do we have the solutions? In fact, they are there. They exist, and we have them at hand. Globally, wind could supply worldwide electricity consumption 40 times over. That's a lot. 20 years ago, the best projections for wind energy were that we might reach 30 gigawatts by 2010. We already beat that goal by 2019, over 20 times over. So there's been a lot of investment in wind. There's an exponential curve, in fact, showing the use of wind energy, and it's quite inspiring. It's the same with even more inspiring when you look at the best projections for solar 18 years ago. At that point, by 2010, they estimated we might be able to add 1 gigawatt a year. Well, when 2010 rolled around, we were 7 times higher than that. And then in 2019, it was exceeded by 121 times. So there's definitely a significant rise in investment in alternative and green energy. Again, another exponential curve. We're used to being not wanting to see curves go up, but for these curves, these are the curves we want to see go up significantly. We don't want to flatten these curves. And one of the reasons, or the main reason, is because the cost of these technologies is coming down so quickly. It's kind of like what happened with computer chips. They were very, very expensive at one point, and then they have decreased significantly over the years. So here's just an example of the effect it's having in Chile. These are the solar panels they have under construction and have been approved for construction to begin. Now, obviously, this is a bit of a breakout, and there are many regions around the world where we are seeing similar patterns. So it's incredibly inspiring to see that kind of dramatic growth happening. And we're not going to run out of solar energy either. We get as much in 1 hour as the entire global economy uses in a full year. Again, so much opportunity there. And look at the future projections here for storage capacity. It's a new $1 trillion industry. So when we worry about fossil fuels and the impact on the economy, there are other ways to build the economy. It doesn't have to be on old systems. Is there any precedent for such rapid technology adoption, though? I mean, are we being overly optimistic? Well, as a matter of fact, I've witnessed it, and many of you may have also. It had to do with those newfangled mobile phones back in the 80s. So in 1980, AT&T commissioned a study to forecast cell phone use by the year 2000. Consulting firm came back and after all their work and said they'd probably be able to sell 900,000 phones. AT&T said, that's great. But when 2002 came around, 109 million. So they were out by 120 times. There are now 10 billion cell phone connections around the world. That's more than there are people in the world. So yes, rapid technology is possible. Why was that? Why were we able to accomplish this in the world? Well, there's three things. Costs dropped sharply. Again, it had to do with, how much, what the cost was to build the first one is definitely different from the last one. Quality improved dramatically. And this is one of the biggest things from a global perspective that's really important. All of the low-income nations that had no landline telephone grids, like the United States and most of Europe did, for example, they were able to leapfrog the old technology. They didn't have the grids and they don't need the grids with new cell phone technology. So that bodes really well for even energy, solar and wind energy as well. You do not need the grids for solar panels. You can literally put them on top of any building and power that building. So here's another exponential curve that's getting pretty exciting as well. Global electric cars on the road. Seeing electric vehicles begin to displace the internal combustion vehicles in basically every car manufacturer in the world. Here you can see it in motion. So 6 years ago, electricity from solar and wind was cheaper than electricity from fossil fuels in 1% of the world. Oops. 5 years later, it was cheaper than fossil electricity in 2/3 of the world. And 4 years from now, or 3 years from now, actually, because we're in 2021 now, it'll be cheaper than for the entire world, it will be cheaper to use this than fossil fuel energy. That's significant. The industry projections now are that within 2 years, electric vehicles will reach price parity in both the US and Europe for SUVs and large cars, a year later in China for mid-sized cars, and by 2024 for all segments of the car market. So if you're looking to buy a new car in the next little while, maybe wait another year or two and you'll be able to invest in an electric vehicle. The other place that a lot of carbon dioxide gets wasted is through the global building, through houses and buildings. For so long, buildings were constructed by people and companies who were in competition with other builders to make sure that the initial purchase price of the building was competitive. So they had to keep it as cheap as they could while keeping their margins high. And that gave them an incentive just to skimp on things, really. But today, a person or company that buys buildings or leases those buildings, they have a huge incentive to reduce their energy bills. So they want buildings that are more efficient. So so they're building more efficient buildings now, and then they're retrofitting them as well. So when the bills go down, it's a win-win because you're creating jobs, you're reducing pollution, and you're reducing the cost of operating the building overall. LED lights is another thing. They're cheaper and better within basically a 5-year gap. They were going to make up, and within 5 years, they're going to make up 95% of the new lighting market. Again, it's one of those rapid technology transitions, and the amount of energy that they use is tiny fraction compared to what was used with the conventional incandescent bulbs. And again, it's the same story here. The cost has come down so dramatically that it's making it more affordable to make that transition. So now we maybe look at agriculture, because it's another massive impact on carbon emissions in the world. So agriculture and the food system are key to a global climate change response. So the good news is, again, that organic farmland is growing worldwide. quite significantly. If you look at kind of by region or by continent, Oceania's Australia, New Zealand type thing, they're doing phenomenally well. North America is doing okay. It's getting better, but it's certainly it's moving in the right direction at least. And if we I don't know if you remember, but I showed a slide earlier about the flooded lands in the Midwest from 2019 that you know, there was all sorts of implications for the food security. It turned out that the lands that the hundreds of thousands of acres that actually recovered really quickly from that flood, by and large, those were farms that had already converted to a form of regenerative agriculture. So they lost less topsoil and they had more resilience for plant growth. So very, very briefly, I'm not going to get into this too much, but regenerative agriculture prioritizes soil health, improves carbon sequestration, increases water retention, and reduces erosion. So it's things like no-till farming and crop rotation, as well as some other things. It's very old technology, but it's being readopted now by some of the farming community. So we went through the agricultural revolution 8,000 years ago. We went through the industrial revolution, more recently, we've gone through the digital revolution. So now what we're in is like maybe the early stages of the sustainability revolution. So as the magnitude of the industrial revolution combined with the speed of the digital revolution, and it's the biggest new business opportunity in the history of the world and a great way to create new jobs and build the economy. The other piece of the puzzle that is really important in terms of talking about overall sustainability of the global population has to do with population projections. So the world is finally seeing a change in the course of population growth. In China and India, these were the projections a couple of years ago from the United Nations. But look at the way they projected for the continent of Africa. So this is what it used to look like. There's been a brand new projection come out that shows Africa's population is increasing more slowly and it's due to flatten out. India's population is coming down and China's population is coming down as well. The original global projection was taking us close to 11 billion people by the end of the century. Now, the new projection is that we are likely to peak in less than 50 years, and by the end of the century, will be less than 9 billion. Now, we're at 7.8 billion now, so there's still growth that's going to be happening, but it is a success story. What's leading to this? Again, there's different factors leading to it, but it has to do with the education of girls in particular, as well as boys in developing countries, the empowerment of women. There's higher child survival rates, so families aren't needing to have 6 or 8 children in case they lose several. And then there's fertility management, so it's access to knowledge that's happening in the developing world as well. When all 4 of these elements are present, we see the sharp reduction in family size and fertility rate. And in some countries, we actually see negative population growth. Pakistan's a bit of an outlier, but anyway, overall, a positive. Oh, and Nigeria, sorry, I didn't know that was coming. So can we change? Yes, we absolutely do have the technology and the ability to make those changes. We've got what we need. So here's the big question: will we change? And it's the main reason we're here. But we do have a lot going for us. So in 2015, the Paris Agreement was signed. Every nation in the world agreed to work together to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by mid-century. So when I was taking this training, it was pre-US election. The US was due to pull out, and that other individual was president and had a very different take on things. But on January 20th, the day he became president, Joe Biden signed an executive order bringing the US back into the Paris Accord. So there certainly is a lot more optimism and hope than there was 6 months ago in terms of being able to work towards achieving some of those goals. And President Biden has been very, I don't know if aggressive is the right word, but very strongly supportive of moving in this direction. Here's some of the other things that help, I think, push the decision makers along in the right direction. If in our most jaded times, many of us feel that our economy will drive decision making, here are some of the interesting facts. The business and investment communities are recognizing that fossil fuels are not a very good investment. So here's the S&P. This is, it's generally gone up over the years. This is a 10-year graph. Check out the energy sector. It's gone down, and I imagine, I don't know. Yeah, so this is the beginning of 2020. It hasn't rebounded very much at all. They're not a very good investment anymore. Lots of companies and businesses are divesting in order to stop losing money on fossil fuels. Here's the US investment in clean energy. They're going up and up and up, and they're continuing to go up. In fact, there's over, in terms of investors, there are a lot of companies that have made a commitment to go 100% renewable. So here's just a few of them. And these are fairly big companies, and I'm sure since the slide was made, there are many more that have done that. There's been climate emergency declarations. As of December 2020, there was 1,800 jurisdictions and local governments, 33 countries, and 820 million citizens that have been a part of climate emergency declarations. In Canada specifically, in mid-2019, so Canada did one, and plus there was 505 local governments as well. What else has been happening? The UK is the first major global economy to set an emissions target of net zero by 2050. China has committed to reaching net zero by 2060. China has committed to reaching net zero by 2060. That's amazing. And in fact, China and India are both on track to overachieve their Paris commitments. So there is no excuse for a country like Canada, and certainly countries like the United States, under different leadership now, to be able to work towards achieving some of those. I know that there is not 100% agreement in that. But in terms of Canadian perspective, 90% Canadians see action on climate change as urgent or important. So that was a poll from September of 2019, and 73% of Canadians prefer to see Canada supporting the growth of renewable energy and clean energy sectors. This number isn't as high in Alberta, but it is still well over 50%. I think it was 60% in Alberta, if you looked at the numbers. So there is still overwhelming support for moving in this direction. Of course, then there's also the youth movement. I'm not sure how clear this slide is, but I pulled this off the internet. So this is one of the climate strikes that took place in New Brunswick in 2019. So the youth is there demanding action on this, and it's a big movement, and it certainly has some impact. And if there's nothing else, COVID-19 response has proven that governments can indeed work together. So they can do that, and they can make decisions quickly. There was quick decisions being made, and we must act quickly. So doing everything will cost us nothing, simply because of the investment potential, but doing nothing could cost us everything. That, Lauren, is the end of my presentation. I don't know if there were any questions or any discussion that people wanted to have.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tracey. That was amazing. Yeah, well, someone just mentioned that I guess this morning on CBC there was a report that Denmark is going to invest in build a wind farm, $30 billion in the North Sea. I guess offshore wind seems like it's also something that's really increasing in commonality. Eric Tusking was wondering, I don't know if you know this, if the New Brunswick Building Code is up to date with the National Building Code on energy efficiency. I see you shaking your head.
To my knowledge, no. New Brunswick is still only at the 2010 building code, which does have some energy efficiency stipulations. Well, there was an addendum to the 2010, so but no. Although the 2020 has come out, New Brunswick still hasn't even adopted the 2015 building code, and there's concern among both both builders and building inspection world that, you know, going too fast would be too onerous for people. I'm not sure that's true, but that's the line we've been given. The other thing, and I had a slide, but I took it out because I really wasn't sure how to interpret it. As well, the province came out with its climate change report card, for lack of a better way, just an update in terms of where the action plan is right now. And so the province of New Brunswick has predicted that it is going to exceed its contribution to reducing carbon by 30% for the Paris Accord that was required under that, so its share of Canada's emissions reduction requirements. So I'm not sure where, there's no data to show how that is, but a lot of that has to do with the closing of some of the coal plants as well, and making some other investments. Apparently 40% of the energy now in New Brunswick is from renewable sources, although I think renewable sources includes nuclear power. So take that for however you want to take that. But there are no emissions related to that. So there are lots of ways to interpret the data.
For sure. Yeah. No, I know what you mean. Yeah, and I've seen that as well. And it's interesting when you look at the mix of energy and how New Brunswick produces their power and stuff like that. Someone was asking your opinion on the best strategy to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in New Brunswick. And I guess that's sort of related again. I know New Brunswick, has nuclear power. We have some hydropower, a little bit of wind. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it would be the investment in the green options. So there are tremendous amounts of rural and undeveloped land, especially in central New Brunswick. I know wind can be a bit of a sensitive topic, but let's refer to it as a bit of the fake news that was around the detrimental effects to cows milking and things that we heard about. I think it was probably about 10 years ago in Sackville when they were talking about setting up the wind farms. So there are things obviously that need to be considered, but there are a lot of fairly remote places in New Brunswick that could certainly support wind transmission. The problem, of course, is if you do it where there are no people, you have to transmit the energy as well. So offshore is another option, and then solar as well. There are all sorts of solar fields. It potentially does take away from arable agricultural land, so I guess they have to be placed in an area where it would be where you have little conflict. Yeah, again, like the conflict. And again, at the end of the day, everyone who has anything put next to them is going to complain pretty much. I've learned that as a land use planner, but the idea is that first, it's a public good, and B, we need to look at things in a big perspective, a very large perspective. It can't just be about what you want to see outside your windows every day if we're talking about the health of the planet. So some people have often said to me, well, would you want this stuck next to you? And I'm like, well, yeah, it's fine. I already have gravel pits and I already have all sorts of things next to me. So things that are going to make the world a better place. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, I think it's definitely a case of priorities, and this is a pretty essential problem that we're having. So no, I agree. So we talked about New Brunswick Building Code. Eric was wondering about if you're aware of the other Atlantic provinces in terms of their adoption of the National Building Code.
I don't know, actually. I'm not sure how that, if Nova Scotia has adopted it or PEI. Yeah, I can't speak on behalf of the other provinces. I mean, Ontario has, Quebec has, there's other, I don't know about the 2020 because that would have just come out last year, but they're certainly on the 2015.
Okay. So it's like in every 5 years it gets updated and.
Yep. Yeah, so they include new things, in terms of public health and safety, but as well so the energy pieces have been introduced slowly over the last 10 years, I would say.
Okay. And is there any estimate or idea on sort of what the updated building code would save in terms of greenhouse gas emissions in New Brunswick? No way.
No, if there is, I don't know where it is.
Okay.
Somebody may have done that kind of. I don't know if they've done it for New Brunswick. They would have done it nationally, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm.
That would have been a piece that would have come in terms of justifying why they were required. So that's probably available nationally. I doubt it's available provincially. It's certainly not. But if it was, it would have been based on older numbers. So the development numbers in the Maritimes last year were through the roof. They were far exceeded most of the previous years. So for whatever that means.
Yeah, that's great. Someone was asking about migrating birds and the wind turbines on the Tantramar marshes. And I just wondered if you had any information or comments about like wind turbines and birds or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, bird strikes are always an issue. So I think that was the main reason. Now, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. I think that was the main reason the turbines, the wind farm that was proposed for the Tantramar Marsh, the New Brunswick side,
Mm-hmm.
was turned down because it was a bird migration route. Thank you. So I don't know how the study on the other side, the Nova Scotia side of the marsh, went and how that was dealt with. But I believe it had a lot to do with the bird migration route and bird kill issues in terms of why the one in New Brunswick was not approved.
For sure. Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. Let's see. I don't know if you have any information on off-grid heat pumps or sort of I know that like heat pumps have become a more popular thing recently.
I don't know them personally, honestly. I mean, I don't know, for you working at EOS, you guys probably have more information in terms of the at-home version. So, I mean, there's home versions of, you can do wind turbines depending on what the planning, where you are, what the zoning bylaws permit.
Yeah.
Solar panels are generally permitted, whether they're on the roof or on the ground. I saw somebody had mentioned that they don't have to be on roofs. So, there are all sorts of options for whether you're off grid or you're just trying to kind of be net zero or feed back into the grid, however you want to set up.
Sure.
There are some options. There aren't many incentives in New Brunswick. Certainly are in some other provinces, I think, but there aren't in New Brunswick at this point. So that would be something that's that could be, tackled. Certainly there's a lot of interest in that kind of thing, but
yeah, for sure. No, that's great. Was there any other slides you wanted to share or information you didn't get to?
No, I went through that fairly quickly because I didn't know how long it was going to take, so I apologize if I talked really fast. But
I think it was okay.
yeah, no, the slideshow itself is a lot of it is kind of a canned version that comes from the Climate Reality project, but I know when I first saw I mean, it's relatively shocking and discouraging, quite frankly, the first half of it. But really, that's the point that drives the message home. But I really do like the opportunities for optimism and some of the things that have been happening around the world. Maybe not in the United States in the last 5 years, and maybe not even in Canada to the degree that some of us would like, but it's happening in other places for sure. So
Yeah, no, I think that's really great. Yeah, the amount of hail.
oh, that was
Especially
insane.
in 15 minutes, 5 feet. Like, that's wild.
I have not looked that storm up, but that was insane, that photo.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Yeah, and I know that like you see these things in movies, and I feel like, what was it? The movie 2012 or something had something like that, similar
Yeah.
in that,
Yeah.
you know, and
The end of time. Yeah.
yeah. Eric is just saying this presentation is quite up to date and more encouraging than what the story was 10 years ago.
Yeah, back when Al Gore started doing his oh God, what was that called?
Oh, the
The
inconvenient.
Inconvenient Truth. Yeah, so that was my introduction to Al Gore's version of the story.
Okay.
I saw that video, and yeah, no, it was quite honestly, it was a little terrifying. I mean, and the first part hasn't gotten any better, because I think at this point now we are before. um, 10 years ago, even when we were talking about climate change, there was a lot of hesitation by certainly anyone that worked in the government, but a lot of scientists, to be able to say that, this event that we had is related to climate change. That was, you could never make that 100%, and still from a scientific point you cannot say that there's a direct correlation. But I think it's gotten to the point where now it's the some of the crazy storms are so getting to be so common that it can't be anything but that. So I'm not a scientist, so I'm quite happy to say, yeah, that's climate change. We're seeing it right now.
For sure. Yeah, I know exactly. I'm wondering if this experience and like being trained and doing these presentations has helped you at all in terms of conversations with friends and family. I know a lot of folks have family or friends that are, in the oil industry and sort of maybe don't, I don't know, believe or go along with
Yeah.
everything that we think sometimes. And I just wondered if if getting that training and having more information has been helpful at all, or if you still find it pretty challenging. I don't know if you had those
Yeah.
conversations, but I feel like it's pretty common.
Yeah. I tend to. We do have family in the oil patch.
Me too.
I I don't get it. I can't talk politics. I don't want, honestly, because I don't think we'd speak ever if we ended up getting into that.
Fair enough.
So I've never given this presentation to family. In fact, I don't think my kids have ever seen it. They don't want to know. I mean, they know, but
Yeah.
we talk about the broader things on a regular basis. But I would I would be very shy to give this to family. I'm very happy to give it on this kind of stage, and I've been sharing it with a lot of Mount Allison classes as well lately,
Oh,
as well as
nice.
some other groups in the region. So I'm happy to do that. It is a tough sell though. With your family. So
Mm-hmm.
I think doing a formal presentation like this would be very weird from a family, but at the same
Fair
time,
enough.
it has a lot of impact though. So, maybe it is something I should do. Yeah, I can't
Yeah.
see myself doing it, but
No, fair enough. Yeah, fair enough. No. And I guess I just wondered if it like helped like broach any of those topics, or I mean, I think it's pretty challenging no matter how much information you have or no matter how much you study it,
yeah,
to have
yeah,
conversations like that, because it's different. But yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, certainly professionally, it's been very much a common thing that I tend to talk about in the planning world where I do my work. Um, it's been very, it's now something that people aren't questioning anymore. At the beginning, it was like, really, I don't think we need to talk about that. But you know what? Now it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. Well, just a couple minutes left. If anyone has any other questions or comments they'd like to make, um, I'll let you go ahead. And then if not, thank you so much, Tracey, for being here and giving us this presentation. It's been great.
Yes. Well, I appreciated coming.
For sure. Oh, someone just asked if you had done this presentation, if you'd presented it to town council.
No, I have not. So, if they're interested, I'd be willing to do it. I mean, again, because of the length of it, it does tend to take up quite a bit of time. So,
For sure.
but if council was interested, I would be happy to present to them.
Okay, great. Good to know. All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much. Thanks
Great,
everybody for attending, and have a great rest of your day.
great. Thanks, Lauren.
All right, you're welcome.
Okay,
Take care.
bye.
Bye, everybody.